Everyone loves to listen to a good book, and there are so many wonderful ones to choose, so we decided to bring you this podcast of Stories Come to Life. Each episode features a story from either classic or modern literature, especially chosen to be interesting and exciting to hear. So sit back, relax, and listen to this story come to life. Welcome to Stories Come to Life. I am your host, Kathryn Lopez Luker. Is it a good practice to believe everything you read? When the Charlottetown newspaper prints a paragraph about how the mighty day of judgment may come on the 12th at 2 p.m, all the cousins and friends don't know whether to be frightened or not. They all spend a long time searching their souls and making last-minute preparations for that great and dreadful day, whether it comes or not. Maybe we should all prepare, just in case. Now sit back, relax, and listen to this story come to life. The Story Girl by L.M. Montgomery. Chapter 19. A Dread Prophecy. "I've got to go out and begin stumping out the elderberry pasture this afternoon," said Peter dolefully. "I tell you it's a tough job. Mr. Roger might wait for cool weather before he sets people to stumping out elderberries, and that's a fact." "Why don't you tell him so?" asked Dan. "It ain't my business to tell him things," retorted Peter. "I'm hired to do what I'm told, and I do it. But I can have my own opinion all the same. It's going to be a broiling hot day." We were all in the orchard, except Felix, who had gone to the post office. It was the forenoon of an August Saturday. Cecily and Sarah Ray, who had come up to spend the day with us, her mother having gone to town, were eating timothy roots. Bertha Lawrence, a Charlottetown girl, who had visited Kitty Marr in June, had gone to school one day with her, had eaten timothy roots, affecting to consider them great delicacies. The fad was at once taken up by the Carlisle schoolgirls. Timothy roots quite ousted sours and young raspberry sprouts, both of which had the real merit of being quite toothsome, while timothy roots were tough and tasteless. But timothy roots were fashionable, therefore timothy roots must be eaten. Pecks of them must have been devoured in Carlisle that summer. Pat was also there, padding about from one to the other on his black paws, giving us friendly pokes and rubs. We all made much of him except Felicity, who would not take any notice of him because he was the Story Girl's cat. We boys were sprawling on the grass. Our morning chores were done, and the day was before us. We should have been feeling very comfortable and happy. But as a matter of fact, we were not particularly so. The Story Girl was sitting on the mint beside the well house, weaving herself a wreath of buttercups. Felicity was sipping from the cup of clouded blue with an overdone air of unconcern. Each was acutely and miserably conscious of the other's presence, and each was desirous of convincing the rest of us that the other was less than nothing to her. Felicity could not succeed. The Story Girl managed it better. If it had not been for the fact that in all our foregatherings she was careful to sit as far from Felicity as possible, we might have been deceived. We had not passed a very pleasant week. Felicity and the Story Girl had not been speaking to each other, and consequently there had been something rotten in the state of Denmark. An air of restraint was over all our games and conversations. On the preceding Monday, Felicity and the Story Girl had quarreled over something. What the cause of the quarrel was, I cannot tell because I never knew. It remained a dead secret between the parties of the first and second part forever, but it was more bitter than the general run of their tiffs, and the consequences were apparent to all. They had not spoken to each other since. This was not because the rancor of either lasted so long. On the contrary, it passed speedily away, not even one low descending sun going down on their wrath. But dignity remained to be considered. Neither would speak first, and each obstinately declared that she would not speak first, no, not in 100 years. Neither argument, entreaty, nor expostulation had any effect on those two stubborn girls, nor yet the tears of sweet Cecily, who cried every night about it, and mingled in her pure little prayers fervent petitions that Felicity and the Story Girl might make up. "I don't know where you expect to go when you die, Felicity," she said tearfully, "if you don't forgive people." "I have forgiven her," was Felicity's answer, "but I'm not going to speak first for all that." "It's very wrong, and more than that, it's so uncomfortable," complained Cecily. "It spoils everything." "Were they ever like this before?" I asked Cecily, as we talked the matter over privately in Uncle Stephen's Walk. "Never for so long," said Cecily. "They had a spell like this last summer, and one the summer before, but they only lasted a couple of days." "And who spoke first?" "Oh, the Story Girl. She got excited about something and spoke to Felicity before she thought, and then it was all right. But I'm afraid it's not going to be like that this time. Don't you notice how careful the Story Girl is not to get excited? That is such a bad sign." "We've just got to think up something that will excite her, that's all," I said. I'm praying about it," said Cecily in a low voice, her tear-wet lashes trembling against her pale, round cheeks. "Do you suppose it will do any good, Bev?" "Very likely," I assured her. "Remember Sarah Ray and the money? That came from praying." "I'm glad you think so," said Cecily tremulously. "Dan said it was no use for me to bother praying about it. He said if they couldn't speak, God might do something. But when they just wouldn't, it wasn't likely he would interfere. Dan does say such strange things. I'm so afraid he's going to grow up just like Uncle Robert Ward, who never goes to church and doesn't believe more than half the Bible is true." "Which half does he believe is true?" I inquired with unholy curiosity. "Oh, just the nice parts. He says there's a heaven all right, but no, hell. I don't want Dan to grow up like that. It isn't respectable, and you wouldn't want all kinds of people crowding heaven now, would you?" "Well, no, I suppose not," I agreed, thinking of Billy Robinson. "Of course, I can't help feeling sorry for all those who have to go to the other place," said Cecily compassionately. "But I suppose they wouldn't be very comfortable in heaven either. They wouldn't feel at home." Andrew Marr said a simply dreadful thing about the other place one night last fall, when Felicity and I were down to see Kitty, and they were burning the potato stalks. He said he believed the other place must be lots more interesting than heaven because fires were such jolly things. Now, did you ever hear the like? "I guess it depends a good deal on whether you're inside or outside the fires," I said. "Oh, Andrew didn't really mean it, of course. He just said it to sound smart and make us stare. The Marrs are all like that. But anyhow, I'm going to keep on praying that something will happen to excite the Story Girl. I don't believe there is any use in praying that Felicity will speak first, because I am sure she won't." "But don't you suppose that God could make her?" I said, feeling that it wasn't quite fair that the Story Girl should always have to speak first. If she had spoken first the other times, it was surely Felicity's turn this time. "Well, I believe it would puzzle him," said Cecily, out of the depths of her experience with Felicity. Peter, as was to be expected, took Felicity's part, and said the Story Girl ought to speak first because she was the oldest. That, he said, had always been his Aunt Jane's rule. Sarah Ray thought Felicity should speak first, because the Story Girl was half an orphan. Felix tried to make peace between them, and met the usual fate of all peacemakers. The Story Girl loftily told him that he was much too young to understand, and Felicity said that fat boys should mind their own business. After that, Felix declared it would serve Felicity right if the Story Girl never spoke to her again. Dan had no patience with either of the girls, especially Felicity. "What they both want is a right good spanking," he said. If only a spanking would mend the matter, it was not likely it would ever be mended. Both Felicity and the Story Girl were rather too old to be spanked, and if they had not been, None of the grown-ups would have thought it worthwhile to administer so desperate a remedy for what they considered so insignificant a trouble. With the usual levity of grown-ups, they regarded the coldness between the girls as a subject of mirth and jest, and recked not that it was freezing the genial current of our youthful souls, and blighting hours that should have been fair pages in our book of days. The Story Girl finished her wreath and put it on. The buttercups drooped over her high white brow and played peep with her glowing eyes. A dreamy smile hovered around her poppy-red mouth, a significant smile which to those of us skilled in its interpretation betokened the sentence which soon came. I know a story about a man who always had his own opinion. The Story Girl got no further. We never heard the story of the man who always had his own opinion. Felix came tearing up the lane with a newspaper in his hand. When a boy as fat as Felix runs at full speed on a broiling August afternoon, he has something to run for, as Felicity remarked. He must have got some bad news at the office, said Sarah Ray. Oh, I hope nothing has happened to Father, I exclaimed, springing anxiously to my feet, a sick, horrible feeling of fear running over me like a cool, rippling wave. It's just as likely to be good news he's running for as bad, said the Story Girl, who was no believer in meeting trouble halfway. He wouldn't be running so fast for good news, said Dan cynically. We were not left long in doubt. The orchard gate flew open, and Felix was among us. One glimpse of his face told us that he was no bearer of glad tidings. He had been running hard and should have been as red as a rooster's comb. Instead, he was as pale as are the dead. I could not have asked him what was the matter had my life depended on it. It was Felicity who demanded impatiently of my shaking, voiceless brother, Felix King, what has scared you? Felix held out the newspaper. It was the Charlottetown Daily Enterprise. It's there, he gasped. Look, read. Oh, do you think it's true? The end of the world is coming tomorrow at 2:00 in the afternoon. Crash! Felicity had dropped the cup of clouded blue, which had passed unscathed through so many changing years, and now at last lay shattered on the stone of the well curb. At any other time we should all have been aghast over such a catastrophe, but it passed unnoticed now. What mattered that all the cups in the world be broken today, if the crack of doom must sound tomorrow? Oh, Sarah Stanley, do you believe it? Do you? Gasped Felicity, clutching the Story Girl's hand. Cecily's prayer had been answered. Excitement had come with a vengeance, and under its stress, Felicity had spoken first. But this, like the breaking of the cup, had no significance for us at the moment. The Story Girl snatched the paper and read the announcement to the group on which a sudden, tense silence had fallen. Under a sensational headline, "The last trump will sound at 2:00 tomorrow," was a paragraph to the effect that the leader of a certain noted sect in the United States had predicted that August 12th would be the Judgment Day, and that all his numerous followers were preparing for the dread event by prayer, fasting, and the making of appropriate white garments for ascension robes. I laugh at the remembrance now, until I recall the real horror of fear that enwrapped us in that sunny orchard that August afternoon of long ago. And then I laugh no more. We were only children, be it remembered, with a very firm and simple faith that grown people knew much more than we did, and a rooted conviction that whatever you read in a newspaper must be true. If the Daily Enterprise said that August 12th was to be the Judgment Day, how were you going to get around it? Do you believe it, Sarah Stanley? Persisted Felicity. Do you? No, "No, I don't believe a word of it," said the Story Girl. But for once her voice failed to carry conviction, or rather, it carried conviction of the very opposite kind. It was borne in upon our miserable minds that if the Story Girl did not altogether believe it was true, she believed it might be true, and the possibility was almost as dreadful as the certainty. "It can't be true," said Sarah Ray, seeking refuge as usual in tears. "Why, everything looks just the same. Things couldn't look the same if the Judgment Day was going to be tomorrow." "But that's just the way it's to come," I said uncomfortably. "It tells you in the Bible. It's to come just like a thief in the night." "But it tells you another thing in the Bible, too," said Cecily eagerly. "It says nobody knows when the Judgment Day is to come, not even the angels in heaven. Now, if the angels in heaven don't know it, do you suppose the editor of the Enterprise can know it, and him a grit, too?" "I guess he knows as much about it as a Tory would," retorted the Story Girl. Uncle Roger was a Liberal, and Uncle Alec a Conservative, and the girls held fast to the political traditions of their respective households. "But it isn't really the Enterprise editor at all who's saying it. It's a man in the States who claims to be a prophet. If he is a prophet, perhaps he has found out somehow. And it's in the paper, too, and that's printed as well as the Bible," said Dan. "Well, I'm going to depend on the Bible," said Cecily. "I don't believe it's the Judgment Day tomorrow, but I'm scared for all that," she added piteously. That was exactly the position of us all. As in the case of the bell-ringing ghost, we did not believe, but we trembled. "Nobody might have known when the Bible was written," said Dan, "but maybe somebody knows now. Why, the Bible was written thousands of years ago, and that paper was printed this very morning. There's been time to find out ever so much more." "I want to do so many things," said the Story Girl, plucking off her crown of buttercup gold with a tragic gesture. "But if it's the Judgment Day tomorrow, I won't have time to do any of them." "It can't be much worse than dying, I suppose," said Felix, grasping at any straw of comfort. "I'm awful glad I've got into the habit of going to church and Sunday school this summer," said Peter very soberly. "I wish I'd made up my mind before this whether to be a Presbyterian or a Methodist. Do you suppose it's too late now?" "Oh, that doesn't matter," said Cecily earnestly. If you believe, Peter, that's all that's necessary." But it's too late for that," said Peter miserably. "I wanted to wait till I got old enough to make out what was the difference between Presbyterian and Methodist. But I'll have to chance it now. I guess I'll be a Presbyterian because I want to be like the rest of you. Yes, I'll be a Presbyterian." "I know a story about Judy Pineau and the word Presbyterian," said the Story Girl, "but I can't tell it now. If tomorrow isn't the Judgment Day, I'll tell it Monday. If I had known that tomorrow might be the Judgment Day, I wouldn't have quarreled with you last Monday, Sarah Stanley, or been so horrid and sulky all the week. Indeed I wouldn't," said Felicity, with very unusual humility. Ah, Felicity, we were all, in the depths of our pitiful little souls, reviewing the innumerable things we would or would not have done if we had known. What a black and endless list they made, those sins of omission and commission that rushed accusingly across our young memories. For us, the leaves of the book of judgment were already opened, and we stood at the bar of our own consciences, than which for youth or eld there can be no more dread tribunal. I thought of all the evil deeds of my short life, of pinching Felix to make him cry out at family prayers, of playing truant from Sunday school and going fishing one day, of a certain fib, no, away from this awful hour with such euphonious evasions, of a lie I had once told, of many a selfish and unkind word and thought and action. And tomorrow might be the great and terrible day of the last accounting. Oh, if only I had been a better boy. "The quarrel was as much my fault as yours, Felicity," said the Story Girl, putting her arm around Felicity. "We can't undo it now, but if tomorrow isn't the Judgment Day, We must be careful never to quarrel again. Oh, I wish Father was here." "He will be," said Cecily. "If it's Judgment Day for Prince Edward Island, it will be for Europe, too." "I wish we could just know whether what that paper says is true or not," said Felix desperately. "It seems to me I could brace up if I just knew." But to whom could we appeal? Uncle Alec was away and would not be back until late that night. Neither Aunt Janet nor Uncle Roger were people to whom we cared to apply in a crisis. We were afraid of the Judgment Day, but we were almost equally afraid of being laughed at. How about Aunt Olivia? "No, Aunt Olivia has gone to bed with a sick headache and mustn't be disturbed," said the Story Girl. "She said I must get dinner ready because there was plenty of cold meat and nothing to do but boil the potatoes and peas and set the table. I don't know how I can put my thoughts into it when the Judgment Day may be tomorrow. Besides, what is the good of asking the grown-ups? They don't know anything more about this than we do." "But if they'd just say they didn't believe it, it would be sort of comfort," said Cecily. "I suppose the minister would know, but he's away on his vacation," said Felicity. "Anyhow, I'll go and ask Mother what she thinks of it." Felicity picked up the Enterprise and betook herself to the house. We awaited her return in dire suspense. "Well, what does she say?" asked Cecily tremulously. "She said, 'Run away and don't bother me. I haven't any time for your nonsense,'" responded Felicity in an injured tone. "And I said, 'But Ma, the paper says tomorrow is the Judgment Day.' And Ma just said, 'Judgment, fiddlesticks.'" "Well, that's kind of comforting," said Peter. "She can't put any faith in it, or she'd be more worked up." "If only it wasn't printed," said Dan gloomily. "Let's all go over and ask Uncle Roger," said Felix desperately. That we should make Uncle Roger a court of last resort indicated all too clearly the state of our minds. But we went. Uncle Roger was in his barnyard, hitching his black mare into the buggy. His copy of the Enterprise was sticking out of his pocket. He looked, as we saw with sinking hearts, unusually grave and preoccupied. There was not a glimmer of a smile about his face. "You ask him," said Felicity, nudging the Story Girl. "Uncle Roger," said the Story Girl, the golden notes of her voice threaded with fear and appeal. "The Enterprise says that tomorrow is the Judgment Day. Is it? Do you think it is?" "I'm afraid so," said Uncle Roger gravely. "The Enterprise is always very careful to print only reliable news." "But Mother doesn't believe it," cried Felicity. Uncle Roger shook his head. "That is just the trouble," he said. "People won't believe till it's too late. I'm going straight to Markdale to pay a man there some money I owe him. And after dinner, I'm going to Summerside to buy me a new suit. My old one is too shabby for the Judgment Day." He got into his buggy and drove away, leaving 8 distracted mortals behind him. "Well, I suppose that settles it," said Peter in a despairing tone. "Is there anything we can do to prepare?" asked Cecily. "I wish I had a white dress like you girls," sobbed Sarah Ray. "But I haven't, and it's too late to get one. Oh, I wish I'd minded what Ma said better. I wouldn't have disobeyed her so often if I'd thought the Judgment Day was so near. When I go home, I'm going to tell her about going to the Magic Lantern Show." "I'm not sure that Uncle Roger meant what he said," remarked the Story Girl. "I couldn't get a look into his eyes. If he was trying to hoax us, there would have been a twinkle in them. He can never help that. You know he would think it a great joke to frighten us like this. It's really dreadful to have no grown-ups you can depend on." "We could depend on Father if he was here," said Dan stoutly. "He'd tell us the truth." "He would tell us what he thought was true, Dan. But he couldn't know. He's not such a well-educated man as the editor of the Enterprise. No, there's nothing to do but wait and see." Let's go into the house and read just what the Bible does say about it, suggested Cecily. We crept in carefully, lest we disturb Aunt Olivia, and Cecily found and read the significant portion of Holy Writ. There was little comfort for us in that vivid and terrible picture. Well, said the Story Girl finally, I must go and get the potatoes ready. I suppose they must be boiled, even if it is the Judgment Day tomorrow. But I don't believe it is. And I've got to go and stump elderberries, said Peter. I don't see how I can do it. Go away back there alone. I'd feel scared to death the whole time. Tell Uncle Roger that, and say if tomorrow is the end of the world, that there's no good in stumping any more fields, I suggested. Yes, and if he lets you off, then we'll know he was in earnest, chimed in Cecily. But if he still says you must go, that'll be a sign he doesn't believe it. Leaving the Story Girl and Peter to peel their potatoes, the rest of us went home, where Aunt Janet, who had gone to the well and found the fragments of the old blue cup, gave poor Felicity a bitter scolding about it. But Felicity bore it very patiently. Nay, more, she seemed to delight in it. Ma can't believe tomorrow's the last day, or she wouldn't scold like that, she told us, and this comforted us until after dinner, when the Story Girl and Peter came over and told us that Uncle Roger really had gone to Summerside. Then we plunged down into fear and wretchedness again. But he said I must go and stump elderberries just the same, said Peter. He said it might not be the Judgment Day tomorrow, though he believed it was, and it would keep me out of mischief. But I just can't stand it back there alone. Some of you fellows must come with me. I don't want you to work, but just for company. It was finally decided that Dan and Felix should go. I wanted to go also, but the girls protested. You must stay and keep us cheered up, implored Felicity. I just don't know how I'm ever going to put in the afternoon. I promised Kitty Marr that I'd go down and spend it with her, but I can't now. And I can't knit any at my lace. I just keep thinking, what's the use? Perhaps it'll all be burned up tomorrow. So I stayed with the girls, and a miserable afternoon we had of it. The Story Girl again and again declared that she didn't believe it, but when we asked her to tell us a story, she evaded it with a flimsy excuse. Cecily pestered Aunt Janet's life out, asking repeatedly, Ma, will you be washing Monday? Ma, will you be going to prayer meeting Tuesday night? Ma, will you be preserving raspberries next week? And various similar questions. It was a huge comfort to her that Aunt Janet always said yes or of course, as if there could be no question about it. Sarah Ray cried until I wondered how one small head could contain all the tears she shed. But I do not believe she was half as much frightened as disappointed that she had no white dress. In mid-afternoon, Cecily came downstairs with her forget-me-not jug in her hand, a dainty bit of china, wreathed with dark blue forget-me-nots, which Cecily prized highly, and in which she always kept her toothbrush. Sarah, I'm going to give you this jug, she said solemnly. Now Sarah had always coveted this particular jug. She stopped crying long enough to clutch it delightedly. Oh, Cecily, thank you. But are you sure you won't want it back if tomorrow isn't the Judgment Day? No, it's yours for good, said Cecily, with the high, remote air of one to whom forget-me-not jugs and all such pomps and vanities of the world were as a tale that is told. Are you going to give anyone your cherry vase? Asked Felicity, trying to speak indifferently. Felicity had never admired the forget-me-not jug, but she had always hankered after the cherry vase, an affair of white glass with a cluster of red glass cherries and golden green glass leaves on its side, which Aunt Olivia had given Cecily one Christmas. No, I'm not, answered Cecily with a change of tone. Oh, well, I don't care, said Felicity quickly. Only, if tomorrow is the last day, the cherry vase won't be much use to you. I guess it will be as much use to me as to anyone else, said Cecily indignantly. She had sacrificed her dear forget-me-not jug to satisfy some pang of conscience, or propitiate some threatening fate, but surrender her precious cherry vase she could not and would not. Felicity needn't be giving any hints. With the gathering shades of night, our plight became pitiful. In the daylight, surrounded by homely, familiar sights and sounds, it was not so difficult to fortify our souls with a cheering incredulity. But now, in this time of shadows, dread belief clutched us and wrung us with terror. If there had been one wise older friend to tell us in serious fashion that we need not be afraid, that the Enterprise paragraph was naught save the idle report of a deluded fanatic, it would have been well for us. But there was not. Our grown-ups, instead, considered our terror an exquisite jest. At that very moment, Aunt Olivia, who had recovered from her headache, and Aunt Janet were laughing in the kitchen over the state the children were in because they were afraid the end of the world was close at hand. Aunt Janet's throaty gurgle and Aunt Olivia's trilling mirth floated out through the open window. "Perhaps they'll laugh on the other side of their faces tomorrow," said Dan with gloomy satisfaction. We were sitting on the cellar hatch, watching what might be our last sunset o'er the dark hills of time. Peter was with us. It was his last Sunday to go home, but he had elected to remain. "If tomorrow is the Judgment Day, I want to be with you fellows," he said. Sarah Ray had also yearned to stay, but could not because her mother had told her she must be home before dark. "Never mind, Sarah," comforted Cecily. "It's not to be till 2 o'clock tomorrow, so you'll have plenty of time to get up here before anything happens." "But there might be a mistake," sobbed Sarah. "It might be 2 o'clock tonight instead of tomorrow." It might. Indeed, this was a new horror which had not occurred to us. "I'm sure I won't sleep a wink tonight," said Felix. "The paper says 2 o'clock tomorrow," said Dan. "You needn't worry, Sarah." But Sarah departed, weeping. She did not, however, forget to carry the forget-me-not jug with her. All things considered, her departure was a relief. Such a constantly tearful damsel was not a pleasant companion. Cecily and Felicity and the Story Girl did not cry. They were made of finer, firmer stuff. Dry-eyed, with such courage as they might, they faced whatever might be in store for them. "I wonder where we'll all be this time tomorrow night," said Felix mournfully, as we watched the sunset between the dark fir boughs. It was an ominous sunset. The sun dropped down amid dark, livid clouds that turned sullen shades of purple and fiery red behind him. "I hope we'll all be together wherever we are," said Cecily gently. "Nothing can be so very bad then." "I'm going to read the Bible all tomorrow forenoon," said Peter. When Aunt Olivia came out to go home, the Story Girl asked her permission to stay all night with Felicity and Cecily. Aunt Olivia assented lightly, swinging her hat on her arm, and including us all in a friendly smile. She looked very pretty with her big blue eyes and warm-hued golden hair. We loved Aunt Olivia, but just now we resented her having laughed at us with Aunt Janet, and we refused to smile back. "What a sulky, sulky lot of little people," said Aunt Olivia, going away across the yard, holding her pretty dress up from the dewy grass. Peter resolved to stay all night with us too, not troubling himself about anybody's permission. When we went to bed, it was settling down for a stormy night, and the rain was streaming wetly on the roof, as if the world, like Sarah Ray, were weeping because its end was so near. Nobody forgot or hurried over his prayers that night. We would dearly have loved to leave the candle burning, but Aunt Janet's decree regarding this was as inexorable as any of Mede and Persia. Out the candle must go, and we lay there, quaking, with the wild rain streaming down on the roof above us, and the voices of the storm wailing through the writhing spruce trees. Chapter 20. The Judgment Sunday. Sunday morning broke, dull and gray. The rain had ceased, but the clouds hung dark and brooding above a world which, in its windless calm, following the spent storm throe, seemed to us to be waiting till judgment spoke the doom of fate. We were all up early. None of us, it appeared, had slept well, and some of us not at all. The Story Girl had been among the latter, and she looked very pale and wan, with black shadows under her deep-set eyes. Peter, however, had slept soundly enough after 12 o'clock. "When you've been stumping out elderberries all afternoon, it'll take more than the Judgment Day to keep you awake at night," he said. "But when I woke up this morning it was just awful. I'd forgot it for a moment, and then it all came back with a rush, and I was worse scared than before." Cecily was pale but brave. For the first time in years, she had not put her hair up in curlers on Saturday night. It was brushed and braided with Puritan simplicity. "If it's the Judgment Day," she said, "I don't care whether my hair is curly or not." "Well," said Aunt Janet, when we all descended to the kitchen, "this is the first time you young'uns have ever got up without being called, and that's a fact." Our appetites at breakfast were poor. How could the grown-ups eat as they did? After breakfast and the necessary chores, there was the forenoon to be lived through. Peter, true to his word, got out his Bible and began to read from the first chapter in Genesis. "I won't have time to read it all through, I suppose," he said, "but I'll get along as far as I can." There was no preaching in Carlisle that day, and Sunday school was not till the evening. Cecily got out her lesson slip and studied the lesson conscientiously. The rest of us did not see how she could do it. We could not, that was very certain. "If it isn't the Judgment Day, I want to have the lesson learned," she said, "and if it is, I'll feel I've done what was right. But I've never found it so hard to remember the golden text before." The long, dragging hours were hard to endure. We roamed restlessly about and went to and fro, all save Peter, who still read steadily away at his Bible. He was through Genesis by 11 and beginning on Exodus. "There's a good deal of it I don't understand," he said, "but I read every word, and that's the main thing. That story about Joseph and his brother was so interesting, I almost forgot about the Judgment Day." But the long drawn-out dread was beginning to get on Dan's nerves. "If it is the Judgment Day," he growled as we went into dinner, "I wish it'd hurry up and have it over." "Oh, Dan!" cried Felicity and Cecily together in a chorus of horror. But the Story Girl looked as if she rather sympathized with Dan. If we had eaten little at breakfast, we could eat still less at dinner. After dinner, the clouds rolled away, and the sun came joyously and gloriously out. This, we thought, was a good omen. Felicity opined that it wouldn't have cleared up if it was the Judgment Day. Nevertheless, we dressed ourselves carefully, and the girls put on their white dresses. Sarah Ray came up, still crying, of course. She increased our uneasiness by saying that her mother believed the Enterprise paragraph and was afraid that the end of the world really was at hand. "That's why she let me come up," she sobbed. "If she hadn't been afraid, I don't believe she would have let me come up, but I'd have died if I couldn't come up. And she wasn't a bit cross when I told her I'd gone to the Magic Lantern show. That's an awful bad sign. I hadn't a white dress, but I put on my white muslin apron with the frills." "That seems kind of odd," said Felicity doubtfully. "You wouldn't put on an apron to go to church, and so it doesn't seem as if it was proper to put it on for Judgment Day either." "Well, it's the best I could do," said Sarah disconsolately. "I wanted to have something white on. It's just like a dress, only it hasn't any sleeves." "Let's go out into the orchard and wait," said the Story Girl. "It's 1 o'clock now, so in another hour we'll know the worst. We'll leave the front door open, and we'll hear the big clock when it strikes 2. No better plan being suggested, we betook ourselves to the orchard, and sat on the boughs of Uncle Alex's tree, because the grass was wet. The world was beautiful and peaceful and green. Overhead was a dazzling blue sky, spotted with heaps of white cloud. "Oh, psh! I don't believe there's any fear of it being the last day," said Dan, beginning a whistle out of sheer bravado. "Well, don't whistle on Sunday, anyhow," said Felicity severely. "I don't see a thing about Methodists or Presbyterians as far as I've gone, and I'm almost through Exodus," said Peter suddenly. "When does it begin to tell about them?" "There's nothing about Methodists or Presbyterians in the Bible," said Felicity scornfully. Peter looked amazed. "Well, how did they happen then?" he asked. "When did they begin to be?" "I've often thought it such a strange thing that there isn't a word about either of them in the Bible," said Cecily, "especially when it mentions Baptists, or at least one Baptist." "Well, anyhow," said Peter, "even if it isn't the Judgment Day, I'm going to keep on reading the Bible until I've got clean through. I never thought it was such an interesting book." "It sounds simply dreadful to hear you call the Bible an interesting book," said Felicity with a shudder at the sacrilege. "Why, you might be talking about any common book." "I didn't mean any harm," said Peter, crestfallen. "The Bible is an interesting book," said the Story Girl, coming to Peter's rescue, "and there are magnificent stories in it. Yes, Felicity, magnificent. If the world doesn't come to an end, I'll tell you the story of Ruth next Sunday. Or, look here, I'll tell it anyhow. That's a promise. Wherever we are next Sunday, I'll tell you about Ruth." "Why, you wouldn't tell stories in heaven," said Cecily, in a very timid voice. "Why not?" said the Story Girl, with a flash of her eyes. "Indeed I shall. I'll tell stories as long as I've a tongue to talk with, or anyone to listen. Aye, doubtless, that dauntless spirit would soar triumphantly above the wreck of matter and the crash of worlds, taking with it all its own wild sweetness and daring. Even the young cherubim, choiring on meadows of asphodel, might cease their harping for a time to listen to a tale of the vanished earth, told by that golden tongue." Some vague thought of this was in our minds as we looked at her, and somehow it comforted us. Not even the Judgment was so greatly to be feared, if after it we were the same, our own precious little identities unchanged. "It must be getting handy, too," said Cecily. "It seems as if we've been waiting here for ever so much longer than an hour." Conversation languished. We watched and waited nervously. The moments dragged by, each seeming an hour. Would 2 o'clock never come and end the suspense? We all became very tense. Even Peter had to stop reading. Any unaccustomed sound or sight in the world about struck us on our taut senses like the trump of doom. A cloud passed over the sun, and as the sudden shadows swept across the orchard, we turned pale and trembled. A wagon, rumbling over a plank bridge in the hollow, made Sarah Ray start up with a shriek. The slamming of a barn door over at Uncle Roger's caused the cold perspiration to break out on our faces. "I don't believe it's the Judgment Day," said Felix, "and I never believed it, but, oh, I wish that clock would strike 2. "Can't you tell us a story to pass the time?" I entreated the Story Girl. She shook her head. "No, it would be of no use to try. But if this isn't the Judgment Day, I'll have a great one to tell of us being so scared." Pat presently came galloping up the orchard, carrying in his mouth a big field mouse, which, sitting down before us, he proceeded to devour, body and bones, afterwards licking his chops with great satisfaction. "It can't be the Judgment Day," said Sarah Ray, brightening up. Patty would never be eating mice if it was. If that clock doesn't soon strike 2, I shall go out of my 7 senses, declared Cecily, with unusual vehemence. Time always seems long when you're waiting, said the Story Girl. But it does seem as if we had been here more than an hour. Maybe the clock struck and we didn't hear it, suggested Dan. Somebody better go and see. I'll go, said Cecily. I suppose even if anything happens, I'll have time to get back to you. We watched her white-clad figure pass through the gate and enter the front door. A few minutes passed, or a few years. We could not have told which. Then Cecily came running at full speed back to us. But when she reached us, she trembled so much that at first she could not speak. "What is it? Is it past 2?" implored the Story Girl. It's 4, said Cecily with a gasp. The old clock isn't going. Mother forgot to wind it up last night, and it stopped. But it's 4 by the kitchen clock. So it isn't the Judgment Day, and tea is ready, and Mother says to come in. We looked at each other, realizing what our dread had been, now that it was lifted. It was not the Judgment Day. The world and life were still before us, with all their potent lure of years unknown. I'll never believe anything I read in the papers again, said Dan, rushing to the opposite extreme. I told you the Bible was more to be depended on than the newspapers, said Cecily triumphantly. Sarah Ray and Peter and the Story Girl went home, and we went in to tea with royal appetites. Afterwards, as we dressed for Sunday school upstairs, our spirits carried us away to such an extent that Aunt Janet had to come twice to the foot of the stairs and inquire severely, "Children, have you forgotten what day this is?" "Isn't it nice that we're going to live a spell longer in this nice world?" said Felix, as we walked down the hill. "Yes, and Felicity and the Story Girl are speaking again," said Cecily happily. "And Felicity did speak first," I said. "Yes, but it took the Judgment Day to make her." "I wish," added Cecily with a sigh, "that I hadn't been in quite such a hurry giving away my forget-me-not jug." "And I wish I hadn't been in such a hurry deciding I'd be a Presbyterian," said Peter. "Well, it's not too late for that," said Dan. "You can change your mind now." "No," said Peter with a flash of spirit. "I ain't one of the kind that says there'll be something just because they're scared, and when the scare is over to go back on it. I said I'd be Presbyterian, and I mean to stick to it." "You said you knew a story that had something to do with Presbyterians," I said to the Story Girl. "Tell us it now." "Oh, no, it isn't the right kind of story to tell on Sunday," she replied, "but I'll tell it tomorrow morning." Accordingly, we heard it the next morning in the orchard. "Long ago, when Judy Pineau was young," said the Story Girl, "she was hired with Mrs. Elder Frewen, the first Mrs. Elder Frewen. Mrs. Frewen had been a school teacher, and she was very particular as to how people talked, and the grammar they used, and she didn't like anything but refined words. One very hot day, she heard Judy Pineau say she was all in a sweat. Mrs. Frewen was greatly shocked and said, "Judy, you shouldn't say that. It's horses that sweat. You should say you're in a perspiration." Well, Judy promised she'd remember, because she liked Mrs. Frewen and was anxious to please her. Not long afterwards, Judy was scrubbing the kitchen floor one morning, and when Mrs. Frewen came in, Judy looked up and said quite proud, over using the right word, "Oh, Miss Frewen, ain't it awful hot? I declare I'm all in a Presbyterian." Chapter 21 Dreamers of Dreams. August went out and September came in. Harvest was ended, and though summer was not yet gone, her face was turning westering. The asters lettered her retreating footsteps in a purple script, and over the hills and valleys hung a faint blue smoke, as if nature were worshipping at her woodland altar. The apples began to burn red on the bending boughs. Crickets sang day and night. Squirrels chattered secrets in the spruces. The sunshine was as thick and yellow as molten gold. school opened, and we small denizens of the hill farms lived happy days of harmless work and necessary play, closing in nights of peaceful and undisturbed slumber under a roof watched over by autumnal stars. At least, our slumbers were peaceful and undisturbed until our orgy of dreaming began. "I would really like to know what a special kind of devilry you young fry are up to this time," said Uncle Roger one evening, as he passed through the orchard with his gun on his shoulder, bound for the swamp. We were sitting in a circle before the pulpit stone, each writing diligently in an exercise book, and eating the Reverend Mr. Scott's plums, which always reached their prime of juicy golden-green flesh and bloomy blue skin in September. The Reverend Mr. Scott was dead and gone, but those plums certainly kept his memory green, as his forgotten sermons could never have done. "Oh!" said Felicity in a shocked tone, when Uncle Roger had passed by. "Uncle Roger swore!" No, he didn't," said the Story Girl quickly. "Devilry isn't swearing at all. It only means extra bad mischief." "Well, it's not a very nice word, anyhow," said Felicity. "No, it isn't," agreed the Story Girl with a regretful sigh. "It's very expressive, but it isn't nice. That's the way it is with so many words. They're expressive, but they're not nice, and so a girl can't use them." The Story Girl sighed again. She loved expressive words, and treasured them as some girls might have treasured jewels. To her they were as lustrous pearls, threaded on the crimson cord of a vivid fancy. When she met with a new one, she uttered it over and over to herself in solitude, weighing it, caressing it, infusing it with the radiance of her voice, making it her own in all its possibilities forever. "Well, anyhow, it isn't a suitable word in this case," insisted Felicity. "We're not up to any extra bad mischief. Writing down one's dreams isn't mischief at all." Certainly it wasn't. Surely not even the straightest sect of the grown-ups could call it so. If writing down your dreams with agonizing care as to composition and spelling, for who knew the eyes of generations unborn might not read the account, were not a harmless amusement, could anything be called so? I trow not. We had been at it for a fortnight, and during that time we only lived to have dreams and write them down. The Story Girl had originated the idea one evening in the rustling, rain-wet ways of the spruce wood, where we were picking gum after a day of showers. When we had picked enough, we sat down on the moss-grown stones at the end of a long arcade, where it opened out on the harvest-golden valley below us, our jaws exercising themselves vigorously on the spoil of our climbings. We were never allowed to chew gum in school or in company, but in wood and field, orchard and hayloft, such rules were in abeyance. "My Aunt Jane used to say it wasn't polite to chew gum anywhere," said Peter rather ruefully. "I don't suppose your Aunt Jane knew all the rules of etiquette," said Felicity, designing to crush Peter with a big word, borrowed from the family guide. But Peter was not to be so crushed. He had in him a certain toughness of fiber that would have been proof against a whole dictionary. "She did too," he retorted. "My Aunt Jane was a real lady, even if she was only a Craig. She knew all those rules, and she kept them when there was nobody around to see her, just the same as when anyone was. And she was smart. If Father had had half her get up and go, I wouldn't be a hired boy today." "Have you any idea where your father is?" asked Dan. "No," said Peter indifferently. "The last we heard of him, he was in the Maine lumber woods. But that was 3 years ago. I don't know where he is now, and," added Peter deliberately, taking his gum from his mouth to make his statement more impressive, "I don't care." "Oh, Peter, that sounds dreadful," said Cecily. "Your own father." "Well," said Peter defiantly, "if your own father had run away when you was a baby and left your mother to earn her living by washing and working out, I guess you wouldn't care much about him either." "Perhaps your father may come home some of these days with a huge fortune," suggested the Story Girl. "Perhaps pigs may whistle, but they've poor mouths for it," was all the answer Peter deigned to this charming suggestion. "There goes Mr. Campbell down the road," said Dan. "That's his new mare. Isn't she a dandy? She's got a skin like black satin. He calls her Betty Sherman." "I don't think it's very nice to call a horse after your own grandmother," said Felicity. "Betty Sherman would have thought it was a compliment," said the Story Girl. "Maybe she would. She couldn't have been very nice herself, or she never would have gone and asked a man to marry her," said Felicity. "Why not? Goodness me, it was dreadful. Would you do such a thing yourself?" "Well, I don't know," said the Story Girl, her eyes gleaming with impish laughter. "If I wanted him dreadfully, and he wouldn't do the asking, perhaps I would." "I'd rather die an old maid 40 times over," exclaimed Felicity. "Nobody as pretty as you will ever be an old maid, Felicity," said Peter, who never put too fine an edge on his compliments. Felicity tossed her golden-tressed head and tried to look angry, but made a dismal failure of it. "It wouldn't be ladylike to ask anyone to marry you, you know," argued Cecily. "I don't suppose the Family Guide would think so," agreed the Story Girl lazily, with some sarcasm in her voice. The Story Girl never held the Family Guide in such reverence, as did Felicity and Cecily. They pored over the etiquette column every week, and could have told you on demand just exactly what kind of gloves should be worn at a wedding, what you should say when introducing or being introduced, and how you ought to look when your best young man came to see you. "They say Mrs. Richard Cook asked her husband to marry her," said Dan. "Uncle Roger said she didn't exactly ask him, but she helped the lame dog over the stile so slick that Richard was engaged to her before he knew what had happened to him," said the Story Girl. "I know a story about Mrs. Richard Cook's grandmother. She was one of those women who are always saying, 'I told you so.'" "Take notice, Felicity," said Dan aside. "And she was very stubborn. Soon after she was married, she and her husband quarreled about an apple tree they had planted in their orchard. The label was lost. He said it was a farmuse, and she declared it was a yellow transparent. They fought over it till the neighbors came out to listen. Finally, he got so angry that he told her to shut up. They didn't have any Family Guide in those days, so he didn't know it wasn't polite to say 'shut up' to your wife. I suppose she thought she would teach him manners. For wouldn't you believe it? That woman did shut up, and never spoke one single word to her husband for 5 years. And then, in 5 years' time, the tree bore apples, and they were yellow transparents. And then she spoke at last. She said, 'I told you so.'" "And did she talk to him after that as usual?" asked Sarah Ray. "Oh, yes, she was just the same as she used to be," said the Story Girl wearily. "But that doesn't belong to the story. It stops when she spoke at last. You're never satisfied to leave a story where it should stop, Sarah Ray." "Well, I always like to know what happens afterward," said Sarah Ray. "Uncle Roger says he wouldn't want a wife he could never quarrel with," remarked Dan. "He said it would be too tame a life for him." "I wonder if Uncle Roger will always stay a bachelor," said Cecily. "He seems real happy," observed Peter. "Ma says it's all right as long as he's a bachelor because he won't take one," said Felicity. "But if he wakes up some day and finds he's an old bachelor because he can't get anyone, it'll have a very different flavor. If your Aunt Olivia was to up and get married, what would your Uncle Roger do for a housekeeper?" asked Peter. "Oh, but Aunt Olivia will never be married now," said Felicity. "Why, she'll be 29 next January." "Well, of course that's pretty old," admitted Peter, "but she might find someone who wouldn't mind that, seeing as she's so pretty." "It would be awful splendid and exciting to have a wedding in the family, wouldn't it?" said Cecily. "I've never seen anyone married, and I'd just love to. I've been to 4 funerals, but not to one single wedding." "I've never even got to a funeral," said Sarah Ray gloomily. "There's the wedding veil of the proud princess," said Cecily, pointing to the long drift of filmy vapor in the southwestern sky. "And look at that sweet pink cloud below it," added Felicity. "Maybe that little pink cloud is a dream, getting all ready to float down into somebody's sleep," suggested the Story Girl. "I had a perfectly awful dream last night," said Cecily, with a shudder of remembrance. "I dreamed I was on a desert island, inhabited by tigers and people with 2 heads. "Oh!" The Story Girl looked at Cecily half reproachfully. "Why couldn't you tell it better than that? If I had such a dream, I could tell it so that everybody else would feel as if they had dreamed it too." "Well, I'm not you," countered Cecily, "and I wouldn't want to frighten anyone as I was frightened. It was an awful dream, but it was kind of interesting too." "I've had some real interesting dreams," said Peter, "but I can't remember them long. I wish I could." "Why don't you write them down?" suggested the Story Girl. "Oh!" She turned upon us a face illuminated with a sudden inspiration. "I've an idea. Let us each get an exercise book and write down all our dreams, just as we dream them. We'll see who have the most interesting collection, and we'll have them to read and laugh over when we're old and gray." Instantly, we all saw ourselves and each other by inner vision, old and gray, all but the Story Girl. We could not picture her as old. Always, as long as she lived, so it seemed to us, she must have sleek brown curls, a voice like the sound of a harp string in the wind, and eyes that were the stars of eternal youth. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Stories Come to Life. Be sure to join us next time when we continue to listen to The Story Girl by L.M. Montgomery. I'd love to hear from you, so please email me at kluker@marshallpl.org. I'll talk to you again soon.